Welcome back to Securing the Telework Workforce, sponsored by RSA here on Federal News Network. My guests today are Robert Carey, the Vice President and General Manager for Global Public Sector Solutions at RSA. Karen Evans is the Chief Information Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, and Brian Gattoni, Chief Technology Officer at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And Brian, before the break, we were talking about the CDM program, and you being the CTO at CISA should know a lot about that. And so tell us how that has been affected, and in particular, what is incumbent on agencies doing CDM in this age of mass telework with everything so diffuse and so diverse.
Sure. To follow up on Karen's points and where the CDM tool set enables agencies to help manage risks in their networks, it's understanding how that risk profile is shifting. It's a very pertinent use case to understand how these capabilities, while securing the network, enable our employees to meet their mission. And printing is a really good use case for a risk management discussion, because printing to a local printer means accepting risk in one of a couple of different areas, and it is up to each individual agency to figure out where that risk can be managed. And CDM needs to give them the tool sets to do that and enable those choices. Those risks are: allow the computers to print, all right, push the file across that home network to a home printer, right, allow that capability. It's a risk trade-off with what I would consider a less preferable option, and that is employees start to email documents to their personal accounts and use their personal computing devices to get that hard copy into their hands, versus issuing additional technologies that make interacting with hard copy media a little bit easier, such as iPads or tablets or Surfaces, what have you, that allow folks to get that tangible, I'm reading a thing and can mark up on it, feeling to hit their mission, but doesn't require producing paper that then requires appropriate storage or destruction, right? So figuring out where that risk combination is for your employees and their mission is an important concept, and using CDM tools to help manage the monitoring of data moving across those devices is important.
Yeah, and Robert, that gets into an area that both Karen and Brian touched on, and that you should also know. I know you know from your federal experience, but sometimes in the drive to cybersecurity and protection, we forget about the mission, and that people actually do have to do work in some kind of well-lubricated machinery. And sometimes the cybersecurity measures, as has been mentioned over the years, can get in the way of that. And so people find these workarounds like sending to personal email and so forth. So maybe comment on how to keep the mission and the user in mind, even as you implement deep cybersecurity.
Well, yeah, a good question, Tom. So really the network is the mission right now, right? It carries it on its back, and I think Karen and Brian would attest that the minute you start overlapping your home network and your work network, and you try to get something done, you raise your risk meter. Just end of discussion. So if you're the CISO and the CIO, and I'm a recovering CIO, Karen's now reliving the dream again. But we're at that point where we have to really stare at this, and how do I enable mission to be accomplished? Print is a fine example, because suddenly the minute you overlap architectures, you have inherent risk challenges there. There are other aspects of what I like to refer to as an old term, role-based access. So when we want to control data, have we gone in and really fine-tuned access to data sets or applications at the level that we want? Because there are some things that are so sensitive, and they may be controlled unclassified information, that you don't want printed at home. You don't want it to even be able to get there, right? And so we have to stare at the problem a little more fine and with finer lenses than we have in the past, because all that work has been done at 7th D or any other building in the government. So it's down the hall. The printer's down the hall. That's easy. It's not easy when the printer's on somebody's desk at home. And then people sort of overlook sometimes, I'm trying to get my work done, as opposed to I'm trying to get my work done securely. So we have to stare at the problem a little bit differently in order to ensure mission gets accomplished, and mission gets accomplished securely.
All right, let's talk about something also Rob mentioned earlier, and that is the Security Operations Center, the SOCs. And a lot of those people are actually probably still going in. And one of the issues as people begin to get visibility into networks, and that becomes an important activity. They're looking at network activity, but you're also looking now at hundreds of thousands, in some cases, of mobile devices. And so this produces a lot of data. How can the SOC be made to be able to process this information, not get overwhelmed by the amount of data, and yet not leave out any data that it might need in order to do the analysis to find the threats? I see that as kind of a growing problem. We hear this across the government.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a ripe technology opportunity space, right, for automation, right? And so as analysts go through their routine, business practices to understand the data and developing insights they need to be reactive, they're crafting playbooks. They're turning their intuition into decision science that we can automate and leverage technology like service orchestration, automated response capabilities, some of which are in the CDM pipeline, to get the hard stuff off, or the easy stuff off their plate, so they can focus on the hard stuff. So those routine items become recommendations. If they have an automated response, it happens, and they just get a report of that activity, and they can focus back on the harder challenges.
So Tom, I think this is where you're going to start seeing the value of moving forward with the marriage between a chief data officer and how the chief information officer is looking at what's the right risk profile for the information and the mission that we have. The other piece is, to Brian's point, is this is also a really good environment, and you're starting to see a lot of innovation around this about using machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so a lot of things associated with it, you can automate, you can have the machines learn, you can have certain things happen. Technology has evolved to the point, and so in my previous job at Department of Energy, there was a lot of work we were doing around machine learning and how artificial intelligence could work, and how you could have a software-defined network that was actually self-healing, and then make use of newer technologies. And what you'll see going forward, and what is really being evaluated now, is how do you use things such as quantum networks and quantum physics to be able to enable all of that technology and that innovation, so that certain things that are happening can automatically be fixed before it even comes in, because you know what your endpoints are, and that the SOC is going to evolve, and it's not going to be a traditional SOC the way that we've seen them in the past, but it's going to be able to take advantage and really leverage this innovation, so that it's not like, oh, I got to switch this out and I have to do this. That equipment, the way that we're going to work with vendors, the way that we're going to work in this community is, something as simple as, getting packets not even to come in, right? To be able to say, okay, this just doesn't even look right, so it's not even going to come into the enterprise, and you can block it. You can do these things right now. It's all in testing. This innovation is there. You can do it in transit on the network. And so to Rob's point, the network and how we manage and how we enable the security on the network is actually going to change the dynamic of how we manage what our threat landscape is. So there's a lot of promise and a lot of innovation that's out there right now.
Yeah, and Rob, Karen mentioned something that we're seeing widely too, and that is the software-defined network, the last extension, if you will, of the virtualization drive. And then that brings up the issue of the fact that virtual machines are pretty agile gadgets. They can be spun down, they can be spun up, but often in between the spinning down and the spinning up, maybe a patch was issued for one of them. And so it becomes a question of not setting and forgetting, but making sure that when that virtual machine does come back, that it's monitored as if it's a brand new device on the network. Is that something you're seeing? Is that something agencies are getting adept at understanding and implementing?
It is, Tom, because at the end of the day, technology in certain areas is moving at light speed. Virtual machines have been around for a long time, but the network is a living and breathing entity, if you will. And so when you do your scans, and continuous monitoring actually does mean continuous, right? But at the same time, we know that the SOC, that center of knowledge, somebody's staring at a pane of glass and trying to be able to render a decision on behalf of the boss of an action that needs to be taken, right? So as the network continues to evolve and grow and data is traversing it, you have threat intel coming in, you're trying to, make sure you're stopping things from coming in. You are reaching into clouds to see what's going on in your IP address space in the clouds. And then you have this, as we talked about early on, this wide variety of endpoints that you're now trying to keep an eye on. So to me, as we move in software defined, we have to be mindful of this diversity of the network architecture. And then we have to have a central node that can manage this at net speed, as General Keith Alexander used to say years ago. We have to operate at net speed, which to Brian's point is the automation piece. And the automation piece actually isn't quite there yet as far as its ability to respond directly at times at the speed at which it's desired to, but it is coming faster and faster, the ability to drive home information that supports a decision being made in the SOC.
All right. And what about the SOC workforce? I mean, how do they have to change and adopt? Because we sometimes take them for granted, because we all say that you can't take the human ever out of the equation in the kill chain of cybersecurity. And yet at the same time, we say we want to automate as much of the decision making that they don't need to do. So maybe discuss briefly the SOC workforce, the security workforce, security operations center workforce, and how their jobs are changing and their knowledge needs are changing.
Sure, and Rob's exactly right on the potential for automation. And so if you bring the workforce into mind, right, to abuse and then flip an analogy, right? Like, I'm not looking to automate finding the needle in a haystack. That might be an insurmountable challenge at this point. But maybe I can automate getting hay off the haystack, right, and make their jobs easier, so that when they start to figure out what needles they want to go after, there's less noise in the signal for them to sift through. So keeping them at front of mind, what their goals, what their mission, what their results need to be as you put these technologies in place, has to be front and center.
Karen?
So Tom, I appreciate that you're asking about staff, because cybersecurity workforce is always important to me. But I am going to be a little controversial here, because you are being very focused on the SOC. And I would say that what we're doing here at DHS headquarters is actually combining the Network Operations Center and the Security Operations Center. So there's an initiative that we're calling the NOS. And so the way that that's working, to Rob's point and to Brian's point, it's bringing both those pieces together so that you have situational awareness of what's happening across the board. So you need different skill sets depending on what you're doing, especially as you're running an operation. So you should think of some of this as you need a group of people that are doing network capabilities, running operations, making sure that the telework environment is there, the mission can be done. But they're like first responders, or they're in the emergency room, right? They're doing triage so that they can keep the operations going, but they know and they have the skill sets to do the analytics and say, well, this doesn't quite look right, but I have to keep this network connection up and running. So I now need to hand it off to another set of folks who are looking at it from a security perspective of, oh, this isn't right. So this is Brian's point about, the needle in the haystack, like what needles are we going to look at? The team has to be able to get the noise out of the system, then elevate it, triage it, and send it to the set of experts who can say, oh, we really have a big problem here. We have to do X, Y, Z. So it's a combination of both of that. It's not separate anymore. And when you start looking at some of the organizations, and I'm sure Brian's seeing this as he's working with multiple departments and agencies and state and local governments, it's marrying those two together so that you have a network security operations center that can manage to your risk profile, keep the ops going for the mission, but then hand off the information so that the analytics can be done about what is actually happening as it relates to threat.
Yes, because my understanding that is until now, that has been something agencies have not wanted to do.
Right.
They should be separated and remain so, the Network Operations Center and the Security Operations Center. So is this DHS doing this or as a model for the rest of government or?
Well, we're doing it. DHS is doing it. And so, and we, we are an oversight piece to CISA, but we're also a department of an agency that has to implement the rules and the policies that CISA is putting out for the civilian agencies. So we're doing this model. The other thing, when you asked about the workforce, the other piece that DHS has, which is really very exciting, that we're working with our Chief Human Capital Officer on, and we anticipate that we hope that the first cohort will come in October, is DHS Cybersecurity Service. And so that is not a traditional 2210 computer specialist going forward. It is really looking at what are the skill sets that we need, and it's operationalizing the National Institute of Technology, Standards and Technology, NIST, the NICE framework, which is the cyber education framework, right? And so those skill sets are in there. And what Chico has done here in conjunction with CIO and other components within the department is really operationalize this with assessments against major skill sets. So we're working on it, and I know CISA is as well, of identifying and doing a staffing plan that would be the first ones that we recruit through. And so they're not going to be traditionally classified in 2210. They're going to be competitively coming in. And so take, for example, if a person makes it through who doesn't have a PhD, but actually can make it through the assessments and do all these things, and then we can compete with private industry. It could be a high school graduate who has the skill sets based on what I'm looking for and this assessment tool, so I can offer them like $150,000 right off the bat.
Well, that's a good note to end on, the arrival of the whiz kids. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This discussion is Securing the Telework Workforce, sponsored by RSA here on Federal News Network.